Lee Jin did not sleep. He never slept in the presence of anyone, not his bodyguards, not his business partners, not the men who had sworn their loyalty to him in silence and blood and the kind of handshakes that don't get witnessed. Sleep was vulnerability. And Lee Jin had learned, at the cost of everything that had once mattered to him, that vulnerability was the most dangerous currency a man in his position could spend. But to the woman who had just stepped through the door of his private study on the 43rd floor of Sterling Tower in downtown Los Angeles, he looked completely, peacefully unconscious. His eyes were closed. His breathing was slow and even. His powerful frame was settled into the leather chair beside the floor-to-ceiling window with the kind of absolute stillness that only the deeply exhausted, or the deeply deceptive, could manage. To anyone watching, Lee Jin looked like a man finally surrendering to rest, to a rare moment of peace in a life that had never known very much of it. He was not resting. He was hunting. This was a test. In Lee Jin's world, it was always a test. He was 34 years old, and he controlled more money than most people would ever see in 3 lifetimes. His name moved in currents beneath the surface of Los Angeles, spoken with precision in the right rooms, never spoken at all in the wrong ones. He owned legitimate enterprises, a luxury hotel chain, a real estate development firm, a private security company with contracts that the city itself had quietly signed. Behind all of it, his real empire operated with the cold efficiency of a man who had spent a decade learning that trust was the most expensive thing you could give another human being. He had been burned before, more than once, more than he would ever admit out loud. And now, every person who came close enough to matter got tested. Every employee, every associate, every person who smiled at his face while he watched their hands. He had become, through years of deliberate self-construction, a man who assumed the worst and was almost never surprised by it. Almost. Today's test was simple, the kind of simple that cuts deep. On the edge of the mahogany desk beside his chair, he had placed a thick white envelope, deliberately angled, partially open, with a clean stack of $100 bills visible inside. $50,000, neatly bundled, neatly positioned to look like it had been carelessly forgotten by a man too wealthy to keep track of what he left where. The envelope sat under the warm amber glow of the desk lamp, like something left out deliberately for the rain. Downstairs in the cleaning supply corridor, a woman named Nicki had just been informed by the head of household staff that Mr. Lee Jin needed his private study freshened before his 7 o'clock call. What Lee Jin did not account for, what he could not have calculated despite the precision of everything else he planned, was what would walk through that door beside her. He heard the handle turn. He heard the measured professional footsteps of a woman who moved with purpose even when she was afraid. He had noticed that about Nicki in the 3 weeks since she had joined his staff. She did not shuffle. She did not hesitate or apologize with her body the way people did when they felt small in large spaces. She walked like someone who had been through enough fire that even fear no longer had the power to make her flinch. He heard her stop just inside the doorway, and then he heard something else, something smaller. The careful, deliberate tiptoe of a child trying very hard not to exist. Lee Jin's jaw tightened. He held still. Chance. Nicki's voice was barely sound, low and urgent, the voice of a woman threading a needle between calm and pure panic. I need you to hear me right now. You understand? Yes, Mommy. The boy's voice was soft, impossibly soft, like he already felt the weight of the room he had entered. Sit in that corner, on the floor. Do not move. Do not speak. Do not touch a single thing in this room. Mister, Lee is resting in that chair. She paused. He heard her swallow. If he wakes up and sees you here, I lose this job. And if I lose this job, baby, we have nowhere to go. You understand what that means? A beat. Yes, Mommy. Stay on the floor. I'll be back in 10 minutes. I promise. Her footsteps moved toward the interior bathroom. The boy's weight settled quietly onto the far corner of the carpet. Lee Jin could tell by the soft compression beneath the floor, the small exhale of a child making himself invisible. Then, the interior door clicked shut, and Lee Jin was alone with the child. He waited. 5 minutes passed. The rain outside the tower was relentless, a Los Angeles winter storm that had swept in from the Pacific and was punishing everything it touched. It hit the glass in sheets. The study was warm. Lee Jin regulated his breathing and listened. The boy did not move. 3 more minutes. Nothing. Lee Jin's mind, despite everything he had designed this moment to confirm, registered this with something he wasn't ready to name. Most adults placed in a room with $50,000 and an unconscious man felt the pull within 60 seconds. Children, in his experience, were less disciplined, their impulse control still forming, their hands still reaching for what glittered. This boy had been motionless for 8 minutes. Then Lee Jin heard it. The soft creak of a small body rising carefully from the floor. The boy was standing. Lee Jin's muscles locked. Here it comes. The footsteps moved slowly toward the desk, toward the chair, and Lee Jin was already composing the scene in his mind. The reach, the grab, the quiet, the inevitable proof that no one, not even the ones who looked innocent, could be trusted when the opportunity was right in front of them. The footsteps stopped, right beside the chair. Lee Jin waited for the rustle of paper. He waited for the grab. Instead, he felt a sensation he had not felt in years, a small, cold hand resting lightly on the back of his, not grabbing, not searching, just resting, the weight of a feather, the warmth of a question. The touch lasted 2 seconds. Then it withdrew. And then the boy whispered, barely audible beneath the sound of the rain. "You're cold." Lee Jin did not move, but something behind his sternum moved without his permission. Mommy says when someone's cold, you warm them up. A pause, then the sound of a zipper, and then a weight settled over Lee Jin's hands and forearms, small, thin. The boy had draped something over him, his jacket. A child's windbreaker, barely large enough to cover a grown man's wrists, laid over Lee Jin's cold hands like the most sincere thing anyone had offered him in longer than he could clearly remember. Lee Jin cracked one eye open, a single millimeter behind his lashes. What he saw stopped every thought in his mind. The boy was shivering. He stood beside the chair in nothing but a plain red shirt, his natural hair soft above a face that was far too serious for 7 years old, the eyes of a child who had already known loss, who had already learned what it meant to be on the wrong side of enough. And he was not looking at the money. He was looking at Lee Jin's face. His expression held no calculation, no angle, just pure, uncomplicated concern. What he did next would change everything Lee Jin believed about himself. The boy turned to the desk. For one savage half-second, Lee Jin braced for the reach, but chance reached past the envelope. It was hanging dangerously off the desk's edge, an angle Lee Jin had engineered deliberately. Chance, with 2 careful hands, pushed it back toward the center of the desk, away from the edge, and patted it once like he was tucking something precious in for the night. Then he bent down and picked Lee Jin's phone off the floor. It had slid from the armrest when he'd first settled into the chair. He placed it beside the lamp. "Safe now," he whispered to no one. Then he walked back to his corner. He sat down. He wrapped his arms around his knees. He was shivering. He had given his only jacket to a man he did not know. And he said nothing about it. Lee Jin lay completely still. He was a man who had sat across tables from people who had done terrible things and looked them in the eye without flinching. He did not shake. He did not rattle. But in that moment, something dangerous spread quietly through his chest, something he recognized and had been carefully avoiding for a very long time. Conscience, reactivated by a 7-year-old boy in worn-out sneakers. If you are watching this right now and you already feel this story pulling at something deep in you, pause for 1 second. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. This channel is where stories that make you feel alive live. Stories about power, sacrifice, love, and the moment a hard heart finally breaks open. Subscribe now, because you do not want to miss what happens next. Before Lee Jin could fully process what was moving through him, the study door opened. Nicki moved fast, the kind of fast that comes from terror wearing the mask of competence. She had been gone 11 minutes, 1 minute longer than she had promised, and her instincts, sharpened by 2 years of surviving things she should not have survived, were already screaming before she cleared the doorway. She took in the room in one sweep. The boy in the corner, without his jacket. The jacket on Lee Jin's hands, the envelope on the desk. Lee Jin's closed eyes. Her brain ran the calculation in under 3 seconds and landed on the worst possible version of all of it. She crossed to her son in 4 strides. Chance! Her hands found his shoulders, her voice a breath below sound. What did you do? Why is your jacket on him? Did you touch anything? Did you touch that envelope? Chance looked up at her with the patient eyes of a child who knows he has done nothing wrong but understands that the adult world does not always reward that. No, Mommy, he was cold. Oh, God. The words came out of her carrying everything. Every sleepless night, every bill paid twice over, every decision she had made in the 2 years since James had been killed in an industrial accident that the insurance company had found 17 legal reasons not to cover. Every morning she had woken up and chosen for this child not to fall apart. She reached for the jacket on Lee Jin's hands and began to pull it away, her fingers shaking. I'm sorry, she whispered to the man she believed was sleeping, the man whose name made other men lower their voices. I'm so sorry, he didn't mean any harm. He's just a little boy. Please, please don't wake up. She did not know he was already awake. She did not know he had been awake the entire time. She did not know that every word she spoke was being catalogued by a man who had not heard genuine fear wrapped inside genuine love in so long that he had begun to believe the combination no longer existed. And she absolutely, entirely did not know what Lee Jin had discovered about her in the 48 hours before she had walked into this study today. That was the secret that would shift the ground beneath both of them. Lee Jin let out a slow theatrical exhale and shifted in the chair. He heard Nicki go completely still. He opened his eyes as if they were heavy. He blinked. He looked at the ceiling. Then he turned his head and looked at the woman standing 3 feet away. He owned a child's jacket in one trembling hand and a 7-year-old boy half hidden behind her legs. He let the silence do its work. You brought a child into my private study. His voice was exactly what she had feared, low, even, the kind of quiet that is louder than anything else in the room. Yes, sir, I apologize. The schools were closed, I had no child care, and Mrs. Park approved his presence only if… Mommy. Chance's small voice cut through the room like a blade through paper. Both adults looked at him. The boy stepped out from behind his mother's leg. His chin was up, his hands were at his sides, he was trembling slightly, but his eyes were direct and clear. I came in by myself, Chance said. Mommy told me to wait outside. I came in because I could hear it was cold by the window and I was worried. Lee Jin looked at the boy for a long time. You were worried? Yes, sir. About me. You looked cold, sir. Lee Jin said nothing. But something moved behind his eyes, something that had not moved in 7 years. He stood up. He was tall in a way that changed the shape of a room, and when he moved toward the desk, both Nicki and Chance went absolutely still. He picked up the white envelope, turned it once, then looked at the boy. Did you know what was in this? Chance thought carefully, the way children do when they've decided to take a question seriously. It looked like money, sir. It is money. Lee Jin set it back down. Why didn't you take it? The question landed like a stone dropped into still water. Nicki's breath stopped. But Chance thought about it honestly. Because it wasn't mine, he said simply. A silence stretched out that had no bottom. Lee Jin walked to the window. He stood with his back to them, looking down at the rain-soaked body of Los Angeles 43 floors below. The city glittered even through the gray, full of people who spent their whole lives reaching for things that didn't belong to them. You can go, he said quietly. Your employment is not affected. Nicki exhaled. She took Chance's hand and moved toward the door, quickly, cleanly, the way you move when a door is open and you know it might not stay that way. But Lee Jin's voice stopped her at the threshold. Nicki, she turned. I know who you are. The silence that followed those 5 words was different from all the silence that had come before. And this was the silence of a floor disappearing. Excuse me? Lee Jin turned from the window. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were asking something she didn't yet understand. Your husband's name was James Okafor. He worked as a financial analyst for Seung Capital, a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. He died 22 months ago when a support beam collapsed at a worksite in Koreatown. He paused. It wasn't an accident. The room was silent except for the rain. Nicki did not move. Her hand, the one holding Chance's, tightened without her permission. She felt her son look up at her face, felt him reading her the way children read their parents before parents learn to hide themselves. She gathered every piece of her composure into one clean, controlled breath. "Chance," she said, on her voice steady in a way that cost her everything. "Sit in the corner, sweetheart. Just for 1 minute." Chance looked at Lee Jin, then back at his mother. He went to the corner. And Nicki looked at Lee Jin with eyes that had just stopped being afraid and started being something else entirely. "How long have you known?" she asked. Lee Jin walked back to the desk. He stood behind it, and in that positioning, the desk between them, the storm behind him, the city below, the meeting became what it had always really been. Not employer and employee, not powerful man and desperate woman. Two people who had been navigating the same darkness from opposite sides and had finally ended up standing in the same corridor. "Since before I hired you," Lee Jin said. "I know why you came here. Nicki." This was the first gut punch that no one saw coming. Because Nicki had not come to the Sterling Tower looking for a cleaning position. She was a former forensic accountant, one of the best in Los Angeles before James died. Before she had spent 16 months alone at a kitchen table at 2 a.m. with Chance asleep in the next room, unraveling what had really happened. Before she had traced the financial thread from 3 shell companies back through layers of misdirection to one single source. She had taken the position at Sterling Tower because it was the closest she had ever gotten to the center of it all. She was here for the truth. She had always been here for the truth, and Lee Jin had known it from day one. "You think I killed your husband," Lee Jin said. Nicki's jaw tightened. "Did you?" The word hung between them like a blade at the end of a pendulum. Lee Jin held her gaze without flinching. "No. Your money runs through Sung Capital." "It did, before I understood what Sung Capital was being used for." "Convenient. It's the truth." And then his voice shifted, lost its edge of command and found something raw, something that cost him to expose. "I've been looking for the person who gave that order for 14 months, because whoever killed your husband was also positioning to destroy me." The silence after that was a different animal entirely. Lee Jin reached into the desk drawer and placed a folder on the surface between them. He said nothing. He simply looked at her. She crossed the room slowly. She opened the folder. What she saw stopped her breath entirely. It was a financial trail. Clean, precise, meticulously annotated in the margins with the kind of handwriting she recognized, because it was trained the same way hers had been trained, and at the end of it, a single name. Park Seo. Lee Jin's own head of operations, the man who had worked beside him for 11 years, the man Nicki had identified on her first day of work and filed carefully in the part of her mind where she kept things that frightened her. Park Seo had been siphoning money from Lee Jin's legitimate operations for 6 years. James, auditing on behalf of an external client, had followed the numbers straight to the source, and Park Seo had not just ordered James's removal to protect himself. He had done it to protect something larger, something that, if it surfaced, Jat would have put Lee Jin in a federal cell for crimes committed entirely without his knowledge. Park Seo had been engineering Lee Jin's destruction from the inside, and James Okafor had been the one person who had almost stopped him. Nicki looked up from the folder. Her eyes were bright, but her expression was fierce and focused, the face of a woman who processes grief by moving toward the thing that caused it. "You've known it was Park Seo," she said. "Yes. And you haven't moved against him yet because you need the financial reconstruction to survive federal scrutiny." Lee Jin looked at her. Something in his expression shifted, the particular shift of a man who is not used to being accurately read. "Yes. You need a second source, someone who can rebuild the evidence trail in a way that holds in court." She paused, but her voice was flat and exact. "You need me." A long silence. "Yes," Lee Jin said. Nicki sat down slowly in the chair across from his desk. She looked at her hands for a moment, then back at him. "When Chance came into this room today, was any of that part of your plan?" This was the line. The exact place where trust either begins or breaks for good. Lee Jin stood up, and for the first time since she had entered this building 3 weeks ago, she saw something in his face she had not expected from a man like him. Not power, not strategy. Something quieter and more costly than either of those things. Shame. "No," he said. "That was never part of anything I arranged." He looked at the boy in the corner, watching both adults with those patient, too-old eyes. "What happened today was—" He stopped. Searched for the word like a man reaching for something he had not touched in a long time. "Real." Nicki held his gaze, then she looked at Chance. Chance gave her a small nod, the nod of a child who has been reading rooms his whole short life and knows when something in one has just shifted for the better. She looked back at Lee Jin. "Then I think we need to talk," she said. 3 days after the meeting in the study, Park Seo made his move. It was not the move Lee Jin had expected. It was faster, more desperate, and it came from a direction that confirmed everything Lee Jin had suspected about how far the betrayal had been allowed to spread inside his own walls. Park Seo had eyes in the Sterling Tower. He had always had eyes in the tower. That was how he had survived 11 years in proximity to a man who trusted nothing. And something in those 3 days had told him the walls were closing. At 11:47 on a Thursday night, a black car parked outside the apartment complex in South Los Angeles where Nicki and Chance lived. Nicki was awake. She was always awake past midnight. She was at the kitchen table with her laptop open and 2 files running side by side, Lee Jin's financial records on one screen, her own reconstruction of the Suung capital chain on the other. She'd been working this problem for 16 months before she walked into the Sterling Tower, and she was not going to stop because the stakes had gotten higher. She was the kind of woman who processed danger by moving toward it, not away from it. James had loved that about her. He had also told her more than once that it was going to give him a heart attack. She heard the car park outside, and she knew. She didn't know exactly how she knew. She had been in enough situations by now where survival had sharpened something in her past, the level of instinct. She closed the laptop. She went to Chance's room. She picked up her sleeping son without waking him, carried him to the hallway coat closet, sat with him inside it, his head on her chest and her arms around him. Her phone was already dialing. Lee Jin answered on the first ring. "They're outside," she said. No preamble, no softening. She had learned already that he did not require either. "How many?" "1 car. I counted 2 silhouettes. Don't open the door. Don't turn on lights. Stay where you are." His voice was the same, low, controlled, but she heard something beneath it now that she had not expected. Urgency. Then he was already moving. She heard him speaking sharply in Korean on a second line before he came back. 15 minutes. "Okay. Nicki." A pause. "Are you scared?" She thought about it honestly. "A little." "Good," he said. "Fear keeps you sharp. Don't let it make you still." Lee Jin's people arrived in 12 minutes. The 2 men outside were gone in 13. Park Seo had miscalculated. He had spent 11 years in a world where the most dangerous person in any room was whoever was willing to go furthest. He had never adequately accounted for the women in rooms he considered beneath him. That was his consistent, catastrophic error. If this story is living inside your chest right now, if you are gripping your phone and something in you refuses to let this go, do one thing before you go any further. Scroll down, hit subscribe. Ring that bell. This channel does not exist on ads. It exists on you. And what is coming next? The reveal that breaks and rebuilds everything. You cannot miss it. Subscribe now. In the weeks that followed, Nicki reconstructed the financial trail from memory, from documentation she had quietly photographed over 16 months before she had ever applied at the Sterling Tower, and from Lee Jin's internal records that she now had full access to. She built the case the way she had been trained, layer by layer, no gaps, no assumptions, no leaps that couldn't be supported 3 different ways. She was meticulous. She was precise. She worked with the focus of a woman who had been holding something back for 2 years and had finally been given the room to release it fully. She was the sharpest mind that had ever sat at Lee Jin's desk. He knew it from the first session. He knew it from watching her move through a 6-year financial fraud, like she was reading a language she had been fluent in since birth, catching the inconsistencies his own team had missed, tracing the ghost accounts through jurisdictions that were designed specifically to be untraceable, rebuilding the original clean ledger from fragments that had been deliberately scattered. She did not ask for approval. She did not check with him before making decisions about the integrity of the analysis. She worked independently, reported accurately, and when Lee Jin pushed back on one of her conclusions in their second week of collaboration, she looked at him calmly across the desk and walked him, step by deliberate step, through exactly why she was right. She was. Lee Jin did not push back a second time. PD Park Seo was arrested on a Friday morning. The package handed to the federal investigators was so complete and clean and layered that the lead investigator called it the finest forensic accounting reconstruction she had encountered in 20 years of practice. It held. Every piece held. Park Seo did not disappear. He did not negotiate. He was placed inside a legal process that he had spent 6 years believing his money could dismantle. It could not, because the woman who had built the case against him was better than the money. 3 months after the arrest, on a quiet Sunday morning, Lee Jin sat in the leather chair by the window and watched the Los Angeles sky in full unfiltered sunlight for the first time in longer than he could clearly name. The curtains in the study were open. That was Chance's doing. Chance had started coming to the tower every day after school. It had begun the week after the incident in the study, when Lee Jin had called Nicki and asked, formally, carefully, if it was acceptable to offer the boy a standing invitation to use the study for his homework. Nicki had been quiet on the line for a moment. Then she said, "You're asking permission from me? You're his mother." Another pause. He heard her breathe. "Yes," she said. "It's acceptable." Chance had arrived the next Monday carrying his backpack and something else. A toy car. Battered, missing one wheel, the paint worn away at the edges. He placed it on the corner of the desk when he opened his textbooks, and Lee Jin looked at it without saying anything for the first 10 minutes. On the third visit, he asked about it. Chance told him. It had been his father's. James had given it to him the week before the accident. He had told Chance it was the fastest car in the world. Chance had carried it everywhere since the day James died. Lee Jin looked at the car and felt something move through him that had nothing to do with calculation, because he recognized it. Not the model, the specific car. He had seen a photograph of it before, in a file. The file Park Seo had compiled on James Okafor when he had first flagged him as a risk. In that file was a photograph taken of James's home desk. On the desk, beside a laptop and a coffee mug, was a small toy car. The same one, the same worn paint, the same missing wheel. Lee Jin had seen that photograph and moved on. He had processed it as background and filed it away. He had not thought about it again, until the moment a 7-year-old boy placed it on his desk and said, "This was my daddy's. He said it was the fastest car in the world." Lee Jin looked at the car for a long time. Then he said quietly, "Your father was a brave man." Chance looked up. His eyes went very still. "You knew my daddy." Lee Jin was quiet for a beat that lasted longer than most silences. "I know what he found," he said finally. "And I know it was dangerous. And I know he didn't run from it." Chance held this, processed it with the gravity of a child who has been carrying something much too heavy for his size. Then he picked up the toy car and held it out with both hands. "You can have Fast Eddie," Chance said, "for keeping us safe." Lee Jin looked at the car in the boy's outstretched hands. The same cracking open, the same clean, unbearable pain of a heart remembering its function. He reached out and took it, turned it over once, looked at the missing wheel. "I'll tell you what," Lee Jin said, and his voice was different from every version of his voice anyone in that building had ever heard. Not command, not control. Just a man's voice, rough at the edges in the specific way that means it is finally being used honestly. "I'll keep Fast Eddie, but I can't drive a car with 3 wheels. So here's the deal." He looked at Chance directly, the way he looked at people when what he was saying mattered. "You come here every day after school. I help you with your homework. You help me remember what a house is supposed to feel like. And when you finish school, all the way through to the end, I make sure every year, every book, Every door is paid for. You will want for nothing." He paused. "Deal?" Chance thought about it with the seriousness it deserved. Then he held out his hand. "Deal," he said. Lee Jin took the small hand in both of his. He held it for a moment longer than a handshake required. Neither of them mentioned it. But what happened next, what neither Lee Jin nor Nicki could have seen coming, was the move that proved the story was not finished with its revelations yet. 6 months after the study incident, a sealed envelope arrived at Lee Jin's private address. Hand-delivered. No return sender. Inside was a single page with a single line. "She knows more than she has told you." Lee Jin sat with that line for 24 hours. He did not move on it immediately. He had learned, at great cost, that reacting to incomplete information was always the most dangerous error a person in his position could make. And he also knew, in the part of himself he trusted least and had stayed alive the longest, that this note was engineered to do exactly one thing: to detonate, from the inside, the trust that had been building quietly and carefully between him and Nicki over 6 months of shared work and shared stakes, and something that neither of them had named yet, because naming it would have meant admitting how far it had already grown. He took the note to Nicki. He placed it on the desk in front of her without a word and watched her read it. She read it once, then again. Then looked up, and her expression did something he had not expected. She looked relieved. "I was wondering when this would come," she said. Lee Jin sat down slowly. Explain." Nicki opened her laptop. She turned it toward him. On the screen was a document she'd been holding back for 2 months, evidence gathered in the early weeks of her employment, before the study incident, before Lee Jin had revealed what he knew, when she was still operating alone and without a partner. It was a secondary financial trail, one that connected Park Seo not just to the Shung capital laundering and James's death, but to a parallel network. A web of associates who had not been touched by the federal case, who were still active, who were, right now, positioned to absorb everything Park Seo had left behind. "I didn't hand this to the investigators with the rest," Nicki said. Her voice was calm and direct. "Not because I was protecting anyone, but because I have watched incomplete evidence packages handed to federal teams twice in my career. Both times the gaps were filled by assumption and the wrong people walked. I needed the full picture before I gave anyone a partial map." Lee Jin studied the document. He studied her. He thought about what both things meant. "You were protecting the integrity of the case," he said. "Yes." "Not yourself." "No." "Not me." Nicki looked at him steadily. "I didn't make a single decision in this room with you in mind, Lee Jin. I made decisions based on what I believed would produce the right outcome." A silence unfolded between them, the specific silence of two people who have just confirmed something they had been trying to determine about each other for a very long time. "I know," he said. "That's exactly what the note was counting on you not proving." The secondary network was dismantled over the following 4 months. Nicki's documentation drove the core of it. Lee Jin's operational intelligence sealed the perimeter. A federal partnership that Nicki negotiated herself, directly, on her own terms, with the composure of someone who had been preparing for that table her entire career, made it official and permanent. It was clean. It was complete. And when the last name was confirmed and the last account was frozen, Nicki closed her laptop in the study at 11 o'clock at night, sat back in her chair, and for the first time since James died, she did not immediately open another file. She just sat. Lee Jin, who had been reading across the desk, looked up. He watched her without speaking. He understood what the stillness meant. He had been waiting for it, waiting for the moment she allowed herself to finally stop running toward the thing that had been chasing her for 2 years, to let it catch up, to let it pass. He did not break the silence. He let her have it. After a while, she looked at him. "It's done," she said. "Yes," he said. "James would have." She stopped, started again. "He would have wanted it done right. He was that kind of man. He didn't cut corners." "I know," Lee Jin said. "I can tell. He raised you?" Nicki looked at him. Then she laughed, a short, real laugh that surprised both of them. "He didn't raise me. He married me." "Same thing when it's right," Lee Jin said. The silence that followed was different from all the silences that had preceded it. and that this one was not the silence of tension or uncertainty or strategy. It was the silence of two people on the same side of something, finally, after a very long time of being on opposite sides. Some things are too real for declarations. Some trust is built in the space between words. On the last day of Chance's school year, 3rd grade, perfect attendance, a hand-drawn certificate of merit in mathematics that he had decorated with careful precision and presented to Lee Jin with total composure, Lee Jin called them both into the study. 2 things waited on the desk. The first was a framed document. It was a full academic scholarship, private school, university included, established in the name of James Okafor, not in Lee Jin's name, in James's name. Chance stood in front of it and read his father's name out loud in the quiet of the study, and Lee Jin watched the boy's face move through something that most adults spend their entire lives trying to access and never quite reach. Pure, unguarded grief and gratitude, occupying the same moment without canceling each other out. The second thing on the desk was Fast Eddie, but not as Chance remembered him. Lee Jin had had the toy restored by a craftsman, original paint colors matched from photographs, the body cleaned and polished back to what it must have looked like when James first held it. And the missing wheel had been replaced, not with a replica, with a wheel made of solid gold. Chance picked it up. He turned it over carefully. He looked at the gold wheel for a long time. He looked at Lee Jin. "You fixed him," Chance said. Lee Jin nodded. "You gave me something broken," he said quietly. "It seemed right to give it back whole." Nicki was in the doorway. Her hand was pressed over her mouth, not from surprise, but from the specific impact of a moment you have been carrying toward you for 2 years and underestimated entirely. Lee Jin looked at her over Chance's head. "He's going to be extraordinary," he said. Nicki's eyes were bright. "He already is." "I know," Lee Jin said. "He taught me that." Chance placed Fast Eddie carefully on the corner of the desk, right where he always placed him when he sat down to work. "Safe now," he said softly. The same words, the same room, the same boy, only taller now, only less afraid, only more himself. Lee Jin sat back in the leather chair and closed his eyes. Not in deception, not in strategy, not in the cold, calculated stillness of a man who was running a test and waiting to see who would fail it. Just close them. Because for the first time in 7 years, Lee Jin had nothing to test and no one to suspect. He was simply a man in a warm room with the curtains open in a city he had spent a decade controlling and never quite living in. Resting, held in the way that never gets announced, loved in the way that doesn't require a name. And outside, 43 floors below, Los Angeles went on being exactly what it had always been, full of people reaching for things that didn't belong to them, and the rare and extraordinary few who, when they found something precious and unguarded, chose not to take it, chose instead to make it safe. Chance had been one of those few. He had walked into a room designed as a trap, and without knowing it, he had dismantled the man who built the trap. He hadn't taken anything. He had only given what he had. And it had been, in the end, more than enough. More than enough to change a man who believed he was beyond changing. More than enough to solve a crime that had been waiting 2 years for someone brave enough to follow it to the end. More than enough to build, from the wreckage of grief and suspicion and loss, something that looked, quietly, unmistakably, without announcement, like a family. Before you go, I want to hear from you right now. Drop a comment and tell me what city you are watching from. Los Angeles, Lagos, London, Nairobi, Toronto, Atlanta, Accra, wherever you are, let your city be known. You are part of this story too. And answer me this. When Chance placed that jacket over Lee Jin's hands, what did you feel? Because I felt everything. Tell me yours. This channel was built for you. For every person who has ever sat in a room where someone underestimated them and refused to become what they were expected to be. If this story reached you tonight, share it, like it. And if you are not subscribed yet, let tonight be the night you change that. And one last thing. Do you want Chapter 2? Because Lee Jin and Nicki's story, the part that begins after the case is closed, after the last door's locked, after 2 people who were never supposed to trust each other discover they cannot imagine doing otherwise, that story has only just started. the tension between them, the power dynamic that shifts, the enemies who are not finished, the things neither of them will say out loud, but both of them already feel. If you want Chapter 2, say it in the comments. This channel runs on your voice. Thank you for watching. And remember, kindness is never weakness. It is the sharpest thing a person can carry into any room.